In the summer of 2007, Ethan Cole sat in a Kansas prison cell serving a 20-year sentence for armed robbery. His days were long, his nights even longer, and the only thing that gave him a sense of being alive was the letters he wrote to strangers through a prison pen pal program. That was how he met Lydia Morgan, a woman who claimed to be a nurse from Missouri. Her words were gentle, comforting, and full of light. She said she believed everyone deserved a second chance, and Ethan clung to that belief like it was his last hope. Over the months, Lydia sent him pictures of herself, soft curls, bright eyes, a kind smile, and Ethan fell deeply in love with the woman behind the paper. By the time he was released on parole 5 years later, Lydia was waiting for him outside the prison gates with flowers in her hands and tears in her eyes. Within weeks, they were married in a small courthouse ceremony, and Ethan swore that his dark past was finally behind him. At first, their life together seemed normal. They rented a small house on the edge of Wichita, where Lydia worked night shifts at a clinic while Ethan tried to find steady work. She cooked for him, left notes on the fridge, and always kissed his forehead before heading out. But soon, cracks began to appear in their perfect picture. Ethan started noticing strange things: prescription bottles without names, syringes hidden in drawers, and the smell of antiseptic that lingered long after she returned home. One night, he woke to find her burning old photographs in the backyard. When he asked what she was doing, she told him they were just bad memories, but Ethan couldn't shake the image of the photos curling in the flames, showing faces that looked like hers, only slightly different. Suspicion grew into obsession. Ethan began following her, watching where she went, memorizing her every move. He noticed how she flinched whenever someone mentioned her family or her past. One night, he came home earlier than usual and found her changing. What he saw made his stomach twist: bandages wrapped tightly across her chest and scars that didn't make sense. He said nothing, pretending not to notice, but the image burned itself into his mind. Over the next few days, he searched through her belongings in secret, and what he found would shatter everything he thought he knew. Hidden under their bed was a small locked drawer. Inside were documents, an old driver's license, a birth certificate, and a faded mugshot. The name on them wasn't Lydia Morgan. It was Lucas Martin, a man wanted for identity theft and escaping from a psychiatric facility nearly a decade earlier. Ethan's hands shook as he flipped through the papers. The mugshot showed a younger version of Lydia, no makeup, short hair, a cold stare, but unmistakably the same person. His heart pounded as he realized the woman he had loved, married, and trusted was actually a fugitive man who had changed everything about himself to disappear. In that moment, Ethan felt the walls closing in. He wasn't free after all. He had simply traded one prison for another, and the person he thought had saved him was the one who had trapped him deeper than he ever thought possible. For days after his discovery, Ethan Cole lived in silence, consumed by disbelief. He couldn't confront Lydia, not yet. He watched her every movement, listened to every word, searching for the smallest crack in her carefully built mask. The more he observed, the more he realized how little he knew about the person sharing his bed. Her smile seemed rehearsed, her touches mechanical, and her eyes, once warm, now felt hollow. He noticed she never answered the phone when he was around, and whenever a car slowed near the house, she would peek through the curtains with quiet panic. Ethan tried to convince himself there was a reasonable explanation, that maybe she had been forced to change her identity for some noble reason. But the documents said otherwise. Lucas Martin wasn't just hiding. He was running, from the law, from his past, and now from Ethan's growing suspicion. Ethan's mind became a storm of anger and humiliation. He would stare at their wedding photo, the two of them smiling, and feel sick. Every word of love, every promise whispered to him, now felt like a lie. He began drinking again, spending nights out until dawn. When he returned home, Lydia would be waiting, pretending not to notice the smell of whiskey. But he could see the tension in her body, the quiet fear that one day he would ask the questions she could no longer avoid. And that day came sooner than she expected. One afternoon, when Lydia left for work, Ethan took her car and followed her. Instead of going to the clinic, she drove to a small storage facility on the edge of town. Ethan parked nearby and watched as she opened a locker and pulled out a small metal box. His heart pounded as he waited for her to leave. When she was gone, he broke into the locker, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Inside the box, he found surgical tools, hormone vials, wigs, and fake identification cards, all under different names. It wasn't just Lydia and Lucas. There were at least 6 different lives in that box, each one carefully constructed and abandoned like old clothing. Ethan left the facility trembling, realizing that he had married a ghost who could become anyone, then vanish at will. That night, he confronted her indirectly, mentioning Lucas's name casually, just to see her reaction. She froze for a split second, then smiled, pretending she hadn't heard. But Ethan saw it, the flicker of terror in her eyes. He didn't need confirmation. He already knew the truth. What he didn't know was how far she would go to protect her secret. A week later, police came to their door. They were looking for a man named Lucas Martin, wanted for fraud and a missing persons case. Lydia smiled politely and denied knowing anyone by that name, but Ethan noticed her trembling hands. After the officers left, she packed a bag and said she was leaving for a few days. That night, as her car disappeared down the road, Ethan sat alone in the dark, staring at the documents spread across the table. Something snapped inside him. If she could run from everyone else, she wouldn't run from him. Not this time. He swore that no disguise, no secret, no name could save her from what was coming. Ethan Cole's world began to crumble piece by piece after Lydia disappeared that night. Days passed with no word from her, and the silence in the house grew heavier, like the walls themselves were waiting for something terrible to happen. Ethan stopped sleeping. He replayed everything in his head, the letters, the wedding, the laughter, the touch of her hand, and each memory turned sour. He felt like a fool, a man who had fallen in love with a mask. When a week passed and Lydia still hadn't returned, Ethan went to the police station pretending to be a concerned husband. He filed a missing person report, careful not to mention what he had discovered. But when the officer looked up at him and said there was already an open case for someone named Lucas Martin, Ethan realized they were closer to the truth than he thought. Fear crept in. If the police found her first, he might never get the answers he needed, or the revenge that had begun to burn in his chest. That night, Ethan searched her closet again, desperate for a clue. Behind a row of old coats, he found a hidden compartment cut into the wall. Inside was a single envelope with an address written in shaky handwriting. It led to a motel 2 towns away. Without hesitation, Ethan packed a small bag and left before sunrise. The drive felt endless, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. When he arrived, the motel clerk said a woman matching Lydia's description had checked in a few days ago under a different name, Laura Matthews. Ethan's pulse quickened as he asked for the room number. He waited outside in the parking lot for hours, hidden in the shadows, watching every movement on the second floor. When she finally appeared, carrying a duffel bag and wearing a dark wig, Ethan felt a surge of rage unlike anything he'd ever known. He wanted to run to her, to demand answers, to make her face what she had done to him, but instead, he followed her quietly. She drove to an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Through the cracked barn door, Ethan saw her carefully laying out documents, wigs, and clothing. It was clear she was preparing to disappear again. For a brief moment, a strange sadness crept over him. He remembered how she once smiled when she talked about starting a new life together, how she had promised to be someone better. But now he understood she was never Lydia, never anyone real. She was a collection of lies stitched together by desperation and madness. Ethan returned to his car trembling, torn between grief and fury. As he sat in the dark, thunder rolled across the sky, and rain began to fall. The sound drowned out his thoughts, but deep inside, something shifted. He knew he could never go back to his old life. He couldn't forgive, couldn't forget. By the time the rain stopped, Ethan had made his decision. He wouldn't let her vanish into another identity. If the law couldn't find Lucas Martin, then he would. And when he did, there would be no more running for either of them. Ethan didn't return home after that night. He rented a cheap room in a roadside motel and began following every lead he could find. Each morning, he drove through small towns, stopping at gas stations, cheap diners, and clinics, asking questions in different ways so no one would suspect what he was really after. His obsession grew darker by the day. He stopped shaving, stopped eating properly, his eyes sunken and wild. The image of Lydia, no, Lucas, haunted him constantly. Every reflection, every shadow in the mirror seemed to twist into her face. He couldn't escape the feeling that she was still close, watching him, mocking him. He started hearing whispers at night, a soft voice calling his name in the tone Lydia once used when she wanted to calm him. But now it only filled him with rage. Weeks passed before Ethan finally got a break. A mechanic in a small Missouri town mentioned a woman who had come by to sell a car for cash, no title, no questions asked. The description matched Lydia perfectly. She was heading south. Ethan followed the trail to Arkansas, sleeping in his car, fueled by nothing but hatred and black coffee. On the third day of his search, fate caught up with him. A police cruiser pulled him over on the highway. When the officer ran his name, Ethan was arrested on the spot. His parole violation from Kansas had triggered a warrant. He was sent back to prison, this time under heavy supervision. Prison life felt different now. The walls seemed to close in faster, and the air was heavier. Other inmates whispered about the man who never spoke and never smiled. Ethan refused to eat in the cafeteria, refused to talk during check-ins. He spent his hours staring at the concrete floor, planning. Every night, he replayed the same vision in his mind, Lydia's face melting away, revealing Lucas beneath, smiling coldly. That image became his fuel. Over time, he began to form a plan. He knew the guards' routines, the transport schedules, the weak spots in security. All he needed was an opportunity, and one finally came. During a stormy night in late November, the prison was transporting a group of inmates to another facility. Ethan volunteered for the transfer, pretending to be cooperative. Halfway through the drive, he noticed the van slowing as the rain intensified. The guard stepped out to check a tire, and in that split moment, Ethan made his move. He lunged forward, striking the driver with the chain on his wrists. Then kicked open the side door and jumped into the darkness. The sound of gunshots echoed behind him, but he didn't stop running. He vanished into the forest, barefoot and bleeding, with only one thought echoing in his head. By morning, news spread that a dangerous convict had escaped during transport. Authorities launched a statewide manhunt, warning residents to stay indoors. But Ethan wasn't hiding. He was already on the road again, heading toward the last place Lydia had been seen. The storm had washed away his tracks, but not his purpose. This time, he wasn't chasing love, or truth, or forgiveness. He was chasing the end. Ethan reached the small Arkansas town before sunrise, exhausted, half delirious, and driven by a single purpose. He found the farmhouse again, the same one where he had last seen her preparing to disappear. The front door was unlocked, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of dust and chemicals. He saw clothes scattered across the floor, half-packed bags, and photographs torn in half. Lydia, or Lucas, had been here recently. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Ethan searched every room until he reached the bedroom. There she was, lying on the bed, eyes half open, a syringe on the nightstand. She looked weak, pale, almost lifeless, as if the lies had finally drained everything from her. For a long moment, Ethan just stood there, watching. All the anger and confusion built over years came crashing down. He moved closer, trembling, whispering her name even though it meant nothing anymore. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the windows. Then something inside him broke completely. The world blurred as he grabbed the nearest object, a shard of glass, and everything became red and silent. When it was over, Ethan sat beside the bed, staring at what he had done. He didn't feel relief. He didn't feel victory. Only a terrible, empty calm. As the rain washed against the farmhouse walls when the police arrived the next morning, they found Ethan sitting motionless beside the body, his hands stained with blood, his eyes fixed on nothing. He didn't resist when they arrested him. He spoke only once, repeating a single phrase, "I set her free." The crime shocked the small town and made headlines across several states. During his trial, Ethan showed no emotion, no remorse. He stared straight ahead as the prosecution described the brutal scene, as if his mind was somewhere far away. Psychiatrists who evaluated him claimed he had lost all sense of reality. He insisted that Lydia still visited him at night, whispering through the walls, calling him by name. He was sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility, where his condition grew worse. Nurses reported strange incidents, Ethan laughing alone, talking to someone unseen, objects falling without cause. One morning, they found his cell door locked from the inside and Ethan dead on the floor. On the wall, written in his own blood, were the words, "She told me the truth." No one ever discovered what that meant. The guards still say that at night, when the lights flicker, they can hear two voices in that room, one of a man, and one that sounds like her.